Well, John, the book is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, The Last 8 Days, The Untold Story of the Journey to Flossenburg. Could you start with a word about the Canadian connection to the
Uh,
book? I think you covered in the introduction a bit, but your personal connection to, like that was so interesting, the CIC piece, and then how you ended up with a copy of Mein Kampf and how Canada is kind of mixed in there.
okay, yes. Well, two connections with Canada for me. One is, yes, I was posted there by Gillette. That was about 1993, 94. So our daughter was born there. So that was working there on a kind of expat assignment for Gillette. So I put down some roots at that time and I was almost accepted for honorary Canadian citizenship. So that feels pretty decent. And the second is that many years later, my mum remarried when my dad died relatively at a younger age, and she was very happily married for at least 10 years to someone much older than her, who had fought on the edges at the end of the Second World War, and he served in Canadian intelligence. And so that just to, as people were clearing out the aftermath of World War II in Holland, he was thrown this book and he kept it. And because he knew my historical interest in the period and my interest in studying Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he decided to rashly to give this particular sort of piece, this particular book to his new son-in-law. So that was quite an honor as well. So I did include that in the preface.
Yeah, that's a really, I don't know, almost like coincidental sovereign kind of connection to you're
Yeah.
really connected to this in a unique way to the subject you're writing about.
Yes, and the other thing that I inherited, and I think in the same moment, was like a Bible, and it's a hollowed out Bible. And when you open it, like the pages are all glued together, and that has some resonance for me as a child, because I was at boarding school and I used to smuggle biscuits in those books back to school on a Sunday night. So when you open up this particular Bible, it's called Die Heilige Schrift, and it's got this sort of hollowed out shape in the shape of a handgun. So anyway, don't make the mistake of putting that in your hand luggage when you fly to Germany.
And so, just would that Bible have been from the Nazi side?
I would suspect it was sort of, for some reason, it was in the Gestapo office in
Okay.
Wilhelmshaven. So it's less likely to have been resistance, and or it could have been a resistance Bible, a
Yeah.
resistance pistol. So yeah, don't actually know, because its provenance is unknown.
That's so fascinating, though. I mean, you really have something that easily could end up in some kind of museum.
Yeah, I think I've got those two items, which are pretty. They were good for me because they did give me like a nudge to come on. I'm going to write this book and I'm going to
Okay.
put this on record.
And then, could you just say a brief word about the CIC and how
um,
Canada was kind of involved at the end there?
yeah, I think Canadian intelligence was sort of given the task of like working out who was the good guys and the bad guys. I mean,
Okay.
it's quite a big process, and so that was who my is that the right phrase? My stepfather, the person who my mother remarried, that was
Yeah.
who he was working
Sure.
for. Yeah, the
Oh,
Canadian
that.
intelligence corps.
So why tell Bonhoeffer's story through the lens of his last 8 days? I wonder if you could clarify that a little. I mean, right from the first time I saw the title, I thought, "Oh, that's unique." Someone folk like what? We'll get to it, but my initial thought was, "What's special about the last 8 days?" Why was that the focus for you?
It sort of it gripped me because I wanted to know what really happened at the end of Bonhoeffer's life. There seemed
Okay.
to be so many different kind of rose-tinted, also conflicting accounts about what went down, what who he was with. So, for example, for 65 or 70 years, they didn't know the names of the people on the bus with him. And like the fact that there were 13 in his last service. I mean, for almost 80 years, people have been sort of saying, well, there were 11 in the room or there were,
Okay.
17 and things like that. So I wanted to sort of delve into it, do the proper work and find out, well, what do I really think happened and look at the original 40s, in the 1946, 47 written sources and then the other eyewitness testimony that was captured later on. So it was kind of a primary source project to go back to the original to establish what we think was the best guess about what happened in that last week. So
Had
I was
you
always
been had you been reading Bonhoeffer biographies kind of throughout your life and seen some of these inconsistencies?
uh, no and yes. I got into Bonhoeffer in 1999.
Okay.
I had heard the name Bonhoeffer before, but when I went to Bible College to Trinity Bristol between 99 and 2001, I had a great teacher who was interested in history, and he told me about the Confessing Church. So then I went gradually from that into reading a few more biographies, and then yeah, I sort of noticed that this last kind of chapter was, if you like, in parentheses, it was like an import from another book called The Venlo Incident, which was written by one of the 13 people on the bus with Bonhoeffer. And it was all kind of borrowed. It was kind of like taken in lock, stock, and barrel. And I noticed that then everybody else requoted the same sources without really doing any more work on it. So I wanted to, I simply wanted to do a better job of bottoming out
Okay.
what went down, and what sources are kind of accurate, where they went, who was there, and what I wanted to sort of live through Bonhoeffer's last week and imagine the moments with him in a new way. I think in a way almost like a film script to sort
Okay.
of think, if I'm that up close to what he experienced, then I feel that's kind of honouring to his life and to his journey. So a couple of people have written to me, since I published the book, and they said, this has definitely got a place of honour on my Bonhoeffer shelf and collection, and I think people have, for example, we took a pilgrimage for 15 people to all those places in
Okay.
Germany in April this year, and we're taking another one next year. People want to sort of um, honor the Bonhoeffer story by connecting with his life.
Uh, what was I gonna say? Yeah, like what made you think this was possible, even? Like,
Okay.
did you, yeah, was it just you're like, I'll give this a shot, or did you already know there were sources out there that might be able to clarify this?
I think I knew that there were really no real sources, so I knew that it was a gigantic challenge, and I do
Okay.
like challenges. So I wanted to do a kind of unique book that took a mountain of work that nobody's really done before. So when I had my sabbatical, which was 3 months of time when you don't have to work as a pastor, but you get one every 10 or 12 years. I had to wait, I think, 12. Um, then I used that time. I thought, right, I'm going to really start this project
Okay.
off. So the first thing I did was I went to Schönberg in southern Germany, which is the town that's featured in the book, where he spent the last kind of 2 nights before being transported away. And I sort of thought, how do you get in touch with a German town? So obviously I speak German and, as well as French and stuff. So I contacted the mayor of Schönberg. And then when I went there, because I had a little bit of time in my sabbatical, they treated me like kind of VIP royalty because I was gonna write this. I had this interest. I
Yeah.
wasn't an author at the time, but just because I was interested. And they gave me another book as a gift. They gave me a book by Gunter Riccardi, which he'd only published in 2012. So this is now 2017 when I'm there. And they gave me this book by Gunter Riccardi, and it was pretty much the Riccardi model that I was inspired by and followed. They kind of all the people who were in the overall collection of hostages really tracking down what they said and did and what they said about Bonhoeffer.
Was there a particular, museum kind of archive that you dug into that had, I don't know, like who was on the bus and, kind of data
No,
that,
no,
not,
I mean, there's one amazing archive which I went to again as part of the. I was lucky because the International Bonhoeffer Society decided to sponsor my project,
oh, okay.
so they gave me a grant quite early on. This is now 2 years in, so I was taken into Cambridge to the VHI, the Von Hügel Institute, in 2019, at exactly the same time as the Bonhoeffer Society gave me a grant, and that grant enabled me basically to write the book. So
Okay.
thanks, guys, for the help because it couldn't have happened otherwise on a pastor's stipend. And so with this particular trip, I went to the Tyrolean Alps in north of Italy to the Praxer Wildsee Hotel. Now Bonhoeffer never got there to the Praxer Wildsee Hotel, but the author Gunter Riccardi set up a massive specialized hostages survival archive sort of
Okay.
collection there in one of the kind of um, downstairs rooms of this hotel. So that's a unique archive. It is kind of available to the public, but it's just not known about. And um, Riccardi spent years creating that archive and gathering specific material around the hostage story, the hostage journey, and its amazing end in the Italian Dolomites. So I did go there, and that was a specialist archive.
Yeah, that sounds pretty fascinating.
Yeah, well, to in good in good measure, it kind of when I was there, we had also this like 2.5 foot snowfall, in one night.
Okay.
So I was snowed in and had to eat the beautiful food that was in the hotel while I was doing the Bonhoeffer work. So that kind of
Yeah.
fitted with the story
Oh, that's neat.
because it was April when the others who survived Bonhoeffer were there
Okay.
in 1945. So it helped me feel connected.
Well, why begin on April 1st, 1945? What was significant about that date and the days that followed that?
I think it was the creative lead that I have. I think there are some good stories around Christian numberings around eight.
Okay.
And I kind of noticed that, the 1st of April was like Easter Sunday. And then I noticed that his final service was a week later. So that was what we call Low Sunday in the Anglican tradition. It's not much of a good phrase like there's not much of a good name for a Sunday. It's better in German. It's called White Sunday in the
Okay.
Catholic tradition. So I noticed that those 2 days, the first and the eighth, that's an octave of days. And then he was executed on the ninth. And considering he was executed so early in the morning, not long after 6 o'clock in the morning, I thought really it's about those 8 days. The whole of Easter Sunday, the war's going on, these prisoners are sort of gradually being thrown together. So that was the reason.
What does narrowing the scope to 1 week allow us to see that maybe broader biographies might miss?
I think it enables us to be forensic about the atmosphere in the little bus. I think it enables us to get a good feel about conditions for all of them, Bonhoeffer included. I know who shares rooms on the nights that they sleep with who doesn't, and I know the names of the people who were in the cells, for the first time. I know where the buses stopped and paused and where they didn't. I know that, accurately the names of the places in Germany that they went through and the places they were rumored to have gone through for 70 years, but, didn't stop in. And so I think it enables us to be forensic about the actual journey. So the kind of creative in my spirit for probably about 15 years before I actually started writing the book was Bonhoeffer's final journey. So
Okay.
I did kind of, the book is called The Last 8 Days because I think it's hopefully an appealing name, but it is about his final journey. It was a journey into the unknown. It was a journey he was transported along, and then suddenly the journey ended up with a terrible destination that he wouldn't have wanted, with his own execution. So it was that too.
I mean, I imagine you putting those details together is even impactful for people, still connected to in the Bonhoeffer family. Is there any chance anyone kind of in that world, Bonhoeffer's, ancestor or like, people connected to him, that they reached out to you at any point, any family members?
Well, there's a lovely filmmaker I'm in touch with, and he's directly in touch with close members of the Bonhoeffer
Okay.
family. And what happened to us in terms of like this year, April, when we were doing a load of filming around the 80-year anniversary of Bonhoeffer's death, and I kind of made this friendship with him. So he is making a documentary about Bonhoeffer. So there is about 3 hours of footage of me in his care
Oh,
at some
neat.
point, which will
Okay.
be turned into a film documentary at some point. But because of this friendship, he was in contact with me, and I think it was the timing was this very close today family member was reflecting, and he's nearly he's old now,
Okay.
but he was reflecting on kind of what did it all achieve, and it so happens that one of my uh, Bonhoeffer friends in Wrocław in Poland, who's a Polish professor there, had given me through Cambridge 2 or 3 years earlier a copy of the the Bonhoeffer poem, which is called Who Am I? Which he wrote in prison. So I keep that on my desk as just a reminder, and it's just a thoughtful moment. And so I was in touch with this filmmaker who was like linking me in a kind of like an unusual conversation on the 23rd of April, because Bonhoeffer's older brother was taken out and executed that day. So it was the 80th anniversary of his brother's death. And from a point of feeling really down, when he saw the photo of my desk with a candle that I had lit, a prayerful candle, next to the Who Am I poet, sent, from someone working in this field through his filmmaking friend, I know that he reported that he was just incredibly moved.
Okay.
He kind of had made him feel that there's hope, because the situation in Germany has been very difficult with the Bonhoeffer name, and a load of reasons to feel disinherited and disenchanted and dispirited. So I know that just that simple photo of my prayerfulness meant a lot to the
Oh,
family.
that's neat.
That's a one member of the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you first dug into the story, were there any details that unsettled or surprised you the most? Things you uncovered?
Uh, well, um, yes, there were all kinds, but one kind of quite exciting story. Have you read the book, by the way? Yeah, I think you
I'm
started.
about three-quarters of the way through right now.
Okay. Well, you
Yeah.
might have already got to this particular story. One of the guys on the bus, this wasn't known for the first 70 years, but I've put it out there now. One of the guys on this bus was a British undercover sabotage operative working for the SOE, the Special Operations Executive. Now, he didn't tell anyone in the group that he was a radio operative as well as an SOE trained type of well, he was an expert fighter as he was. He didn't tell anyone in the group that, so that wasn't known in the general literature. But when the story was told and retold and retold and retold, it was about the bus breaking down, and they kind of the guards made the mistake of saying, "Oh gosh, we're all in this together. Our bus is broken down. Can anyone who's an engineer help us repair it?" And so this guy was feeling terrible because he was stricken with fumes. He's called Hugh Falconer or Mallory Falconer. He's stricken with fumes, have had no food. It's like really uncomfortable journey, really slow, the whole nut. And he's feeling like death warmed up. And he suddenly hears this unwise German driver of the bus say this, because he's got enough German really to understand absolutely what's going on. And he goes, "Oh yeah, I'm an engineer. I can fix it." So while the guy's away getting a torch or something, he unscrews the cap quickly while the guy's not looking. He gets some grit and he chucks as much grit in the engine as he can, because he says if the guys found some oil, this wretched bus could have carried on. Who knows how long it could have carried on. So when the guy does come back and put some oil into it with all the grit in the engine, the bus is finished. He's well and truly inconspicuously sabotaging. So of course he doesn't say anything to his fellow prisoners when he gets back in the bus, and of course he doesn't say anything, so nobody knows. And it's like, oh dear, the bus is broken down. Who's going so that's such a good story, because he was
Yeah.
undercover, and like he never blew his cover.
Where
He
where did
said,
you where did you find that one?
well, I'm in touch with his daughter.
Okay.
His daughter's called Evelyn Smith. She lives in Liverpool,
Okay.
and when I first started doing the research and I was like casting the net far and wide, I really wanted to contact members of the families of all the relatives of all the people who were on the bus. So I've been I've got new friends now in Spain, Germany, people all over. And so this was just a UK contact that I
Okay.
made. I mean, I've got miracle stories of people, through a dentistry setup in Berlin, have put me in touch with another family. So almost all of those people were like unknown. If you plug their names into Google in
Okay.
2017, they did not exist. But now, I found out who were the 13 people on the bus.
That's so neat. Can- I know this is kind of a large part of the book and a lot of details here, but can you describe even briefly the transfer from Buchenwald to Flossenburg and what that kind of looked and felt like?
Yeah, it felt like a bit like an Odyssey, and it was dark. And as they emerged from this very unpleasant prison, there were sort of guard dogs and barking and lights, and they were just jammed into this impossible past. I think the first emotion was like uncertainty, and then the second thing is they were like furious with the British guy because he had sort of about seven pieces of luggage. So there was this guy, Captain Page. When he wrote up the story, he kept very quiet about the fact that they were all really miffed off with him because he had sort of VIP level of bags and luggage. So there were 17 people when they first got into the van, and the van was designed in the back maximum for six. So
Okay.
it was so cramped, people were fainting, and it went really slowly. So it was only powered by wood, and the wood also had to be in the back
Okay.
with the 17 people, or sorry, with the 16 people that set off. There were 17 in the block, and actually only 16 were transferred in the first night of the bus. And then after a night or two, they lost three people. So suddenly it felt virtually a lot more spacious, and they started using up the wood. So then they had a bit more. So it was really uncomfortable. There was no food. It was seriously uncivilized because it just reeked to high heaven. It was like it was walled up inside the van, so you couldn't see out. So it was even through cracks you couldn't get a sense of where you. So you're just being transported in a juggling way, and you had no idea where you were being taken to. Whether it was all kind of you just be literally they'd throw open the door and say line up over there, and then you'd be machine gunned. So it was an unsettling and harrowing experience. And then when they stayed, the first time they stayed anywhere, they stayed in Regensburg prison.
Okay.
That was kind of quite good news. They almost relatively enjoyed that because it was a lot better than where they'd been in Buchenwald. And then they got into this beautiful village called Schönberg, and they thought it was like Christmas because they had real beds with real sheets, and it was warm. They had unlimited wood for a fire, and they still didn't have any food, but they could tell that there was kind of like this. These villagers were going to be secretly kind to them. So that was the kind of climax when one of them said, "Look, Bonhoeffer, will you lead a service?" I really wanted to focus on, well, okay, who was there, what happened in the service, and maybe think a little bit about Bonhoeffer and what he might have preached on and stuff like that. So I wanted to journey through those moments.
You give a fair bit of detail about everyone kind of on the bus in the book. How did the other voices, of the other prisoners there, how does that enrich the story? How did you envision that kind of enriching the story of Bonhoeffer?
Well, I think because only one voice had been the in toto narrator, that was of Pain Best. I wanted
Okay.
to sort of stand back and make Pain Best have a voice, but I wanted his voice to be sort of contextualized, so that he's just then one of several voices. So there is a lovely guy called Hermann Punda, and he was the kind of the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Germany before Hitler's accession to power. And he was a military reservist, so he had volunteered to serve his country, but kind of been turned down. And there was no real reason to arrest him or to accuse him of involvement in the plot. So he was always mystified as to why he was on the VIP prisoner list. And they kept just saying to him, sorry, you're just still a Gestapo prisoner. So he was someone who, for example, I don't know what you would do if you were in a survival situation like that. He adopted this strategy of writing a letter to his family every day
Okay.
and then keeping it in a safe place, knowing that it would never be sent or that a reply would be received. But he just wrote these daily letters. And so he managed to somehow keep a diary and do these daily letters. So what my book has done is it's brought to life the Punda contribution to that journey, and it really enhances, beyond the best memories. And the other thing is the other guy I told you about, the SOE operative. Well, he didn't write up his experiences, so this all obviously happened to him in 1945. It was only 30 years later he committed it all to paper, and then it took between 1975, wait for it, until 2019, when the kind of like this stash of handwritten book notes was found by his family,
Oh,
Evelyn and
wow.
her sister. And the sisters looked at each other, and one said, "Well, I don't want to do it. And the other one said, well, I don't want to do it. He said, you're doing it. So he then was left with this job of publishing, this very detailed narrative about what happened in the last week with Bonhoeffer. So, I mean, that's been a primary source for me. So how lucky am I? I start writing in 20, or trying to research in 2017. And suddenly there's a book published in 2019, which is absolutely spot on. And it's a lot of diary details. Suddenly the voices from the prisoners, suddenly I've got three really kind of present voices that I can use, as well as the other author like Riccardi, who'd given partial quotes from a number of other connected people. So suddenly the sources, kind of came my way.
And how does geography now also add something to the narrative? Like you use maps and photos to kind of trace his steps. How does that enrich the whole story as well?
Well, I kind of would ask, my readers about that. But for me, I really was ambitious. Because what I used to do when I was just studying Bonhoeffer's biography and theology, I used just to read these names, and I used to read about the Vara River, and I didn't know where everywhere was, and there would be
Hmm.
place names mentioned, but I couldn't sort of think where the places were in relation to each other. So I was just absolutely determined to find or to have a book that would give you the real places where they traveled through, where they went through, and how they were in relation to, for example, where the Russian front was on the east, or, for example, where they were in relation to how, what parts of what American army was advancing from the west. So again, this is like a complete, cannot believe it's true, but it is story. When I was um, a pastor in Byfleet, I sort of put the word out there, either in the weekly newsletter or whatever, and I just was led to a world class map maker who makes maps with software, who's really interested in researching. So that's the guy who's got all the credits. His name is Bruce
Okay.
Lovell, and I've just seen him again today, and he's kind of like, my lifelong best friend, because I couldn't have written the book without him, because the more he started looking and he started making maps for me, and I started, well, they went from there to there. Oh, so they didn't go there. Like I had all these insights because the maps brought the story. So I wanted to bring the maps so that I could understand the story. And then when I started reading the maps, I went, well, that's in fact, then that means it didn't happen that way. It happened a better way.
Yeah.
So, the maps helped me a lot. I really hope they help my readers.
Yeah. So the maps to some degree were dispelling some myths or
Yeah.
false assumptions. Like would
Yes.
one was one of them that people thought that like the U.S. troops were so close.
Yes, that was one of the major kind of rose-tinted things, that it was all, sort of within a whisker, and the troops, who would have needed to have liberated Flossenburg on the day that Bonhoeffer was executed, still had a long, hard 11, 12 days slog ahead of them, and sometimes they were advancing, 20 kilometers in a day, but it took them that whole 2 weeks to get that 90 kilometers, and every inch was hard fought,
Okay.
and they were held up in Hof, a town about, yeah, well, I'd say it's about 70 to 80 kilometers away from Flossenburg, I think, from memory, and they were seriously held up there for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, just like I haven't been there to retrace Jesus's steps, but just learning about the geography of where Jesus went or where Paul went, I mean, just brings the story to life in a different way. And that is absolutely what I've felt thus far of reading your book, like without being in Germany, but just getting to have some sense of like, this is here, this is here, this is how far they went here, just
Yeah.
uh, does something that other Bonhoeffer biographies, have not done for me
Well,
in my
well,
reading. So just fills out the story more. Uh,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, one of the things again that I learned, in writing the book, and it only came to my awareness very late after we'd already signed everything off, and I just sort of was able to put a footnote in there. But actually, the troops who liberated Flossenburg on the 23rd of April, 1945, who would presumably have been the ones to, if they'd have been able to advance earlier, would have liberated and saved Bonhoeffer's life. They had fought all the way, from D-Day, 6th of June. And if you look at a map, um, just literally you go just due east. You land on Utah Beach and you go east. and they'd fought every inch of that 1,000 kilometers into German territory, and they'd been fighting for a long time. I mean, how many days is it between the 6th of June 1945 and the 23rd of April, so 1944 and the 23rd of April 1944? It's a lot of days, it's a lot of fighting, and it's a lot of lives, given. But yeah, so it made me realize the cost of advancing against stiff opposition.
Mm. Were there unexpected moments of humanity or cruelty on that journey that stood out in your research?
Well, one of the ones that brings a twinkle to my eye when I retell the story um, is from this SOE member of the bus, at that time a prisoner, under a false identity as a downed RAF pilot. He writes in his book that they, as I say, they didn't have any food and they were just been trogging along kind of all night, and they were, going for a bit during daylight hours, and they stopped on a particular sort of narrow stretch of road on their southerly southbound travels, and it was next to a kind of a very well kept cottage with a retired school teacher there. This is what she looked like, and she could tell because they were allowed out, I think maybe for a relief break, and she could tell that all these people were just absolutely sort of, and that they were being guarded by these people with machine guns. And so she instantly took the side of the hostages, and she said, "Right, you lot, come in here. I'm feeding you. So you come in, and you guards, you're not allowed in. Go, you." So this is this like 70-year-old woman just bossed around all the guards. They just took it, and then she fed those captives, those hostages. She fed the prisoners with, you know, milk and bread, and she just gave them what she could, or she sent them on her way. So, I mean, she was laying down the law to.
And so Bonhoeffer would have been in that meal with
He
her.
was in that moment. That was some of the last food that Bonhoeffer actually received was
Okay.
from that lady, and I would love it if a helper in that part of Germany, by the time I narrow down my map and timing expertise even more than I already have, I would love it if someone would say to me, "Do you know what? I think that this may have been the name of the lady, because
Yeah.
I'd love to contact her family." So
I've already asked you a few times this for other ones, but where did that story come from?
that came from Hugh Falcon, because
Okay.
he wrote that story up 30
Okay.
years after it happened.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's from a book called The Gestapo's Most Improbable Hostage, Hugh Mallory Faulkner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's neat. What of much of what people believe about Bonhoeffer's last days up to this point has come from Payne Best.
Yes.
What makes his account, somewhat unreliable?
Um, I think it's thoroughly reliable.
Okay.
So his diary keeping was meticulous, and the sort of if you like, the historical biographer issue I want to, to take issue with Best doesn't really come in the section where he writes about Bonhoeffer. So I think I think what he is guilty of in his book, the Venlo incident, that when you put it down, you think he was the absolute hero who was the centerpiece of the whole story, that meant that all the hostages got rescued in the Italian Dolomites, and that he was absolutely the glue that, and he made that whole story. He was like a wonder worker.
Okay.
So if you read other people's more measured accounts, he certainly did some useful and good things, but
Yeah.
you need to dial down a bit on the putting him in the center of the story. So I mean, look, he got an OBE for his services to the Commonwealth in the First World War. So he's a respected author, and he made a lot of friends in Germany.
Okay.
But he was always Penny Max is always a mixed character. So, for example, I mean, I've written in my book, you won't have got to it yet, but I say, look, the German government, because he published this book, which, he published a book which they liked the story of a lot. So they gave him a Leica camera and a Mercedes Benz as to say, sorry that you had to be imprisoned during the war.
Okay.
It's like, what? So, but a lot of people, and then secretly, he was a bankrupt. So, of course, he sold it all straight away to
Okay.
pay his vast debts. And then he remarries late in life at age 64, someone 38 years younger than him. And, and so it goes on. He's an interesting mixed character.
Are there any famous lines you can think of, or details that are often quoted in sermons or biographies that you realize don't hold up historically?
Well, I think I want to take that one the other way around.
Okay.
So for me, this is the beginning, not the end. I think or however it was said, because I think it was said probably. It could have been said in English, but he was in a completely German speaking environment. But the guy who heard it and first wrote it down was Bain Best, who we've talked about, who was mixed. Um, so I think some research that I've done indicates that Bonhoeffer had already rehearsed that line because he
Which
thought
line?
the line of this is for me, this is not the end but the beginning of life.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Bonhoeffer had already rehearsed that line
Okay.
in 1944 when he left Tegel, because I found the daughter of someone who he was in prison with called Curcio, who was in the Italian Luftwaffe or the Italian Air Force, and he said those words to him. And his daughters, reliably recorded them. So I've added that as a footnote, for example, to Bonhoeffer's final words to the group on the 8th of April 1945. So it was almost like that time back in 1944, he thought he was going to his death. And then when he kind of again thought he was going to his death, when he leaves the group in April 1945, he says those words again. So that takes your question. It's almost like underlined
Yeah.
that what we've heard and held to in terms of Bonhoeffer's things that he said. That I think that's been stood the test.
Okay. Are there any common assumptions you can think of that people bring to Bonhoeffer's death, particularly that your research seeks to correct?
One major one that he knelt and prayed before his death, and
Okay.
the words of the surgeon saying, I've never seen a man die so honorably in all the years of my time as a doctor."
I've quoted that one in sermons before.
Yeah, that's a myth.
Okay.
So that's a self-serving myth because
Okay.
he said those words in a trial in the 1950s, and what he achieved very successfully by that was that as he said those words, he then became regarded by the court as a humane doctor, with the white coat,
Okay.
who was sort of just unfortunately doing a difficult job that he was employed to do. And so he pulled off a great trick, and he was a consummate actor, and everyone has always fallen for it. So that myth was debunked in 1988 by someone who was there in Flossenburg called Mogensen, a Danish writer, and he just says there's just absolutely no way he could have seen those things, and it just was not like that
Okay.
when people stepped up to those difficult moments. I mean, it's such a difficult thing to do, to be naked and to stand and to look at the hook that is going to strangle you to death. And that, they were strangled to death, all of them that morning. And I just can't imagine the ghastliness of being through that experience. But I don't think we can trust rose-tinted accounts
Yeah.
that say it was all done prayerfully and easily.
So on that note, kind of, why does it matter that we strip away some of the hagiography and come face to face with the messy human version of Bonhoeffer's end?
I think there's a really good reason because we don't need to lionize Bonhoeffer. We
Okay.
don't need to sort of embellish his story. His story is real enough and grounded enough and earthed enough as it is. So the real man had feet of clay. In my book, he's quoted. For some reason, it was left out in 1977 biography, but it was already published by then. The fact that he did give in to pressure from the Gestapo, that they threatened to to do bad things to his fiancée unless they just threatened him with his fiancée, and that was his point of vulnerability. So we don't know exactly how they managed to leverage it, but I think what I wanted to do is I wanted to connect with the Bonhoeffer who had feet of clay. He had his point of vulnerability, and he wasn't a shining knight who did everything right. And so, in the bus that I describe, he's criticised for getting to say something stupid,
Okay.
but they would have got him into more trouble. And Betges Bonhoeffer didn't do that because Betges Bonhoeffer pretty much, is well, he's not, you know, unimpeachable, but that was a detail that was left out, and that could, if you leave out too many things that are mistakes, it kind of
Are
adds to the
there,
picture of someone who doesn't make mistakes.
yeah. Are there other things that, that reliable eyewitnesses actually said about Bonhoeffer's presence in those final days? Like Betka or,
Um, well, Betke wasn't a witness in his final
oh,
days,
okay.
but
Sorry.
um, so von Falkenhausen said reliably, when, for example, Bonhoeffer re-prepared his Plutarch, he'd signed it, a very, with a particular pencil. He pre-prepared it in case suddenly he was arrested and taken away, so that it would be like a trail.
Okay.
Uh, and so I think we can rely on the fact that just at the moment when Bonhoeffer's being given a few instants to gather his things, which is not very many possessions and belongings, um, he leaves behind a book. And so this general, one of the most senior German generals in the whole war, who's also by this time a captive, von Falkenhausen, says, after Bonhoeffer's left, I think this is probably when it happens. He says, "Oh look," or it's as Bonhoeffer's leaving. He says, "Look, he's left a book on the desk. Maybe you should take that with him." And one of the guards turns to him and says, "He's not going to be needing that where he's going." So
Is there,
that's pretty chilling.
yeah, do we know anything reliable about his, and you're already, I think, given details about it, but his last night before execution?
Yeah, I can give you one reliable detail that didn't manage to publish in my book, was the daylight broke at 10 to 4. And then I heard the birds 80 years later singing that he would have heard, the local birds. Um, so he would have had 2 or 3 or 4 hours in that kind of camp on the 9th of April.
Oh, that's interesting.
I also met someone who saw his corpse. I
Okay.
interviewed her in Hof. I interviewed his, I met the daughter of someone who saw his corpse, but that wasn't in time for me to publish that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
She was so affected by it, she could never talk about all that time of work she had to do in
Okay.
Flossenburg. She was one of the nurses. So yeah. So so
But, oh,
I
sorry, go
think
ahead.
what we actually know. Oh, the other thing I've done, and again I haven't managed to publish it yet, and I don't think I'll even. I've got a chance of publishing it in my second German edition, but I basically done a lot of work on who was in what cell because there were about 40 cells
Okay.
in that cell block, and I've managed to sort of pinpoint about 5 or 6 of the cell owners where they were, which cell number they were in, pretty much. So we don't know which cell number Bonhoeffer was in, but I've done a world first in terms of working with Flossenburg to work out who was where on the night.
How does your reconstruction kind of shift the legacy away from this kind of sanitized martyr story that many of us grew up with to more of a man of flesh and blood?
I hope it moves the dial a notch in a positive direction.
Okay.
I think if my book had sold 1 million copies, it might help make a significant change in the world. But it's not the kind of book that's going to do that. It's quite a specialist.
Hmm.
Um, I won't even say. No, it's a book designed to be of broad appeal. So I wish and I pray that more people would connect with the story and enjoy it. Because what I want to do is I want to connect it with world history as well. So I very carefully interwoven the stories of what was going on in World War II as Germany went through meltdown. So I've tried to, if you like, weave into the narrative the story of the surrounding war, which was very noisy, you know, literally and at every other level. So I think that does add something to Bonhoeffer literature because no one's really made a serious attempt to do anything like that before. Obviously, I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool bona fide historian, but I did make, from an amateur's point of view, a serious attempt to connect Bonhoeffer's story with world history. And so, for example, one of the things that people have really said to me, "Gosh, John, you really did do something that helped me there. I've connected the stories from Japan and the Far East that were happening on the same days
Okay.
Bonhoeffer's final 8 days, and given if you like, more of a global perspective to how the world was being affected by this unleashing of events that had happened in Germany.
No, I feel like as I've read so far in your book, like you dispel myths and you make Bonhoeffer in ways more human, but not in a way that takes away his, I don't know, his significance and the things we can learn from him. Can you think of lessons that ordinary Christians still can draw from Bonhoeffer's courage under pressure in those last days?
Yeah, I think in my book we see a Bonhoeffer who he's just real, and he's meeting with God in the present moment as he can. So he's hoping to live. He doesn't know that these Gestapo guys are in a Mercedes on the way to collect him. But
Yeah.
what's he doing during that time? He's actually being challenged, and he's saying, okay, to lead a service, to re-inhabit the role of pastor. Um, so with his last breath, he's encouraging, he's sharing something about the goodness and the hope of God. So I think that makes the Bonhoeffer story and legacy all the more powerful, because we knew that before that was how it was. But now, for example, by a complete miracle, and again, this is through Hermann Punder. Hermann Punder, when he was in the bus with Bonhoeffer, he had a son called Tillman, and Tillman was 6 in 1945. But Tillman made it quite a big part of his life's work to bring his father's stories and writings to life. So the Punda archives and materials that I've had access to include the fact that just randomly out of nowhere, um, Tillman Punda found in 2013 the diary from 1945 that his dad had made. And so it was in an annotation form called the Stolz Schrey kind of handwriting annotation,
Okay.
shorthand notation. And that's a very specialist thing to decipher that. So Tilman Punda, by now age 70 something, has gone out and he's found in Switzerland a transcriber who de-annotates this diary of his dad's. And then he says to me, John, I'm sending you a photo of the diary page from the day of Bonhoeffer's service. I said, that's great. And he says, look, in it, we know that the service was at 10 o'clock. We never knew that before, but there we've got evidence from 1945. The service took place at 10 o'clock. So then what I also did, I've interwoven that with, okay, well, look, we know that the bells in Schoenberg, there was a ring of 3 bells, and or I think even 4 in the church tower at the start of the war. But we know that only one of them was left, that Sterbeglocke was left to ring. And so then I got from the local pastor in Schoenberg and say, okay, well, what times of day? Because, a few of them wrote about the lovely ringing of the local church bell in Schoenberg. Well, when did it ring? So I got from the Catholic priest, I got, well, it would ring, at 6, and then it would ring at 9. I got the names of those times the Catholic, would ring the bells. So uh, it's like inhabiting the moment, inspired me to take a pilgrimage group there
Yeah.
80 years later. But I think it helps us to journey with Bonhoeffer, and it does mean that we can stand in his shoes, and we can stand in Schoenberg amidst the villagers who gave him as good a welcome as they could under the circumstances. And it was very moving because they asked me to kneel at the front of their Bonhoeffer church in
Okay.
Schoenberg, 80 years on, with the pastor of Schoenberg, the Catholic pastor. So there was an Anglican and a Catholic kneeling together 80 years on, and the pilgrimage was there in the room, and half of the people who were only English speaking were one side, and the whole place other side was full of local parishioners. Very moving.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, I'm thankful for your time, John. Obviously, thankful for the book. Again, just to ask you one last question. After spending years kind of untangling myths and testimonies here, is there one scene from your book that you hope readers never forget?
Yes, I think I would love them to journey with me into the moment he starts to speak. So
Okay.
he opens his Bible, and I've given people a lot of detail about his preparation for that moment. I would just hope that readers are able, with everything that I've prepared and crafted together and created, to take them to that moment when Bonhoeffer opens his Bible to speak for the last time. I would pray that moment holds good for people, and they can ask that you and I could ask that we would always be faithful unto death, whatever happens. Because Bonhoeffer wrote that God is able somehow to bring good even out of the darkest evil. So he's standing there saying something that would have been hope filled like that, based on Isaiah 53, as his death machinery is already underway to end his life. So
Well,
may we be faithful unto death.
thanks again, John. Bonhoeffer for me has been kind of the most significant, influential, I don't know, Christian character in Christian history. Right from when I was a teenager, starting with Cross of Discipleship and getting through the Fortress Press volumes and the letters and this book is right there with all of that for me. I mean, this is just again, I got a quarter of the way left, but it's just been filling out the picture in such beautiful ways. Thanks for just, I don't know, all the meticulous work that you have done to bring this about. It makes me think, I don't know if you've read much of George Whitefield, but there was a pastor in Ontario named Arnold Dallimore. And Dallimore, I don't think had written anything prior to this, but he was so compelled by Whitfield's life that he gave years, I think, while he was in the pastorate to writing a 2 volume biography on George Whitefield, and he just uncovered sources and documents that nobody had ever found or referred to before. And now, I don't know, let's say 60, 70, whatever years later, that is like the premier George Whitefield biography. Uh, and I feel like you're in I don't know, a similar camp, like not necessarily a full-time academic, but a passion towards a subject that took you on a journey that others haven't, I don't know, been willing to make or had access to make. So yeah,
Well,
thankful for everything you've done here, John. It's been a blessing to me already.
well, you've been so kind to me. If I may, I would just love to invite you personally. I would love you to come on my next pilgrimage.
I was already thinking, I wonder, I should
And
ask
and
John
I
when that is, because that would
that
be
is April the 7th, and it's
okay.
going to be 8 nights, and it's going to be an even better edition than the 80-year edition, because the 80-year edition had to do some specific stuff, and we're then
Yeah.
released from that 81 years on. But yeah, I'd love to have you on that journey, and if and anyone who does want to come,
Hmm.
I'll give you details. And can you
Yeah.
believe it? This is like another amazing coincidence. Um, my surname is McCabe, and the company that offer this program is just called McCabe Travel. It's
Oh,
got
that's
absolutely
funny.
nothing to do with me, other than
Yeah.
that I lead Bonhoeffer tours for them.
Oh, that's funny. Well, thanks so much for your time today, John.